Hello again everyone, this is Michinatsu. I've got an amazing opportunity to interview Steve Kaufmann, who is well known for being able to speak 20 languages. As most of my viewers are from Japan, I have prepared some questions that you would like to ask him. This video will be full of tips to improve your language skills. As always, if you've got any questions or comments, leave it down below. I would love to hear what you have to say. Alright, let's get right into it. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity to do this interview. Most of my viewers are Japanese, and me as their representative, I've got some questions for you. Number one, in Japan, we study English for many years. However, we are still notorious for speaking bad English. Why do you think is the reason for this?
Well, there could be a number of reasons. The closer a language is to your own language, the easier it is to learn. So speakers of European languages have an easier time learning another European language, in other words, English. When I learned Japanese, of course, it's not related to a European language, so that there are the inherent difficulties of a language that's not of the same. But I think there are other reasons. In my experience of learning languages, when we learn a language, we are imitating an aspect of another culture, right? Language is a part of another culture. The better we can imitate the culture, the better we will do. So you kind of allow that English-speaking culture to come in and influence who you are when you speak English. When I speak Japanese, I have a different personality. I say things that are not translated from English. If I'm speaking Japanese, I might say, well, それはあれですけども. What is that? That doesn't exist in English. Japanese way of being, communicating, of connecting with other people. I think sometimes the Japanese in their education system are so focused on learning words for TOEFL or TOEIC, learning the language like they might be learning mathematics. But actually you have to want to get into that other culture and allow it to let you create a new personality in the new language. Japanese people, maybe some of them they treat the subject as too much of a school subject rather than something that they have to kind of culturally get into. When I lived in Japan, I was in lots of meetings. Everybody else in the meeting was Japanese. I was one of them. I don't see myself as separate. You have to want to be them. That's so. I think that part of it, maybe sometimes Japanese culturally, we are very unique. We have this unique culture. We're so different. Well, you're not so different. Everybody's different. Anybody can connect with any other culture through the language. I think some of those attitude things, plus the fact that, the other thing too, of course, is in terms of pronunciation, Japanese has fewer sounds. Spanish is probably easier for Japanese people. Part of it has to do with language. Part of it has to do with attitude.
It's a bit of like everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
So actually my second question was going to be, so I personally believe the culture of communication is a little different. You kind of talk about it in the last question. Do you think like you could become more like a bit humble, like, no, I'm not that good, that kind of attitude when you speak Japanese?
So there's two things there. In Japanese culture, it's not a good thing to say, my product is the best. I am the best. My product is the best. I would always tell my Canadians when they came over to sell, don't brag about your product. Be understated, because the Japanese culture is very much one of understatement. But it's more than that. There's a lot of sort of unspoken things. If you live there long enough, you pick up on it. Like when you communicate, there's a lot of things that go into the communication. In English, things have to be spelled out a little more clearly. In French, even more. You have to basically logically lay everything out. Whereas in Japanese, it's almost what isn't said is just as important as what is said. The sort of concept. So it's a different way of communicating. And I think when we learn a language, we have to try to get used to that. So I think if you do a lot of listening, if you listen to the way people speak, if you pick up on the way people speak, and gradually if you spend a lot of time listening and reading and contact with people, you get better at some of these things. But it's not something you can read up in a book. It's something you have to be sensitive to. But it certainly is true that in every language people communicate differently. There are different values, and you have to be sensitive to that.
Then it makes sense that a lot of people, especially who are fluent in many languages, they say like, it's not only about, for example, doing workbooks and stuff. You have to understand the culture and also the vibes of the language itself, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's difficult to do that if you don't have enough of the language. But you can only do that once you have the confidence of being able to speak well. So once you can speak well, a lot of these other things, they come to you naturally. So it's all part of the process.
There's a question for me related to what you just said. Most of my viewers live in Japan, and they study English very hard, and they want to improve their English skills, but unfortunately, there are not many opportunities to practice English. I mean, especially conversations. What do you think is the most effective routine to learn a language just by yourself?
Well, I was just in Poland, and I studied some Polish about 8 years ago for 3 months. And then 2 months before going to Poland, I did a lot of listening and reading. Nowadays, I go to an online publisher, I buy an audiobook, an ebook, I can import the ebook into Link. You get into the language. There's so much you can do. And I read a book on the plane because I've been doing so much looking up words it's just that the language is washing over me. You have to do that. I know in Japan they do a lot of sort of eikaiwa, and they sit around and Japanese people speak poor English to each other. I don't find that very useful because it's not a meaningful conversation. People are using very limited vocabulary because people are not that good. That time would better be spent finding something of interest to listen to and read. When you have use the English in a meaningful way. There are enough English speakers in Japan, even in some, not just in Tokyo, but elsewhere. Find people that you can speak to. Make it meaningful. And I think a lot of those sort of eikaiwa is make-believe. It's a pretend conversation. It's not a real conversation.
That's true, isn't it?
You're picking up, and if you are the best person there, then you are annoyed that the other people speak so poorly. And if you don't speak very well, you're afraid to speak up because everyone else is speaking better. And it's just not very good. I much prefer to spend the time listening and reading. As a treat, I'll watch a movie. Whereas if you're reading, the words, all the meaning has to come from the words. And if you're listening to an audiobook, all the meaning has to come from the words. And that's what you want to develop. You want to develop that sense of meaning directly from words that you read, words that you hear. So I'm a big fan of input. And when you have the opportunity, of course, speak. Don't worry about how you sound. Don't worry about making mistakes. When you're speaking with someone, it's about communication. And if you're having a meaningful conversation, then you're interested in what the other person is saying, and therefore that is really good content because that's meaningful input. Maybe if you're listening to something you're not that interested in, you're not going to learn that well from it. If you're speaking to someone and you have to know what they're saying, that's very good content. Eventually, speaking is very powerful, but you can prepare yourself for speaking if you don't have a lot of opportunity to speak. I'm a big input promoter. You'll see in the next question. I think input is tremendous, and it's cheap to organize.
Your advice is actually eye-opening because I think in Japan, eikaiwa, so a lot of people go to eikaiwa class or online classes because they just purely want to improve their English. They don't enjoy the conversations at all. The next question it's about the mindset. You're fluent in 20 languages. What are the things that you found important?
I hesitate to say fluent. It's not possible to be fluent in 20 languages, but I have learned 20 languages, including Japanese, Chinese, Spanish, Swedish, German, and so forth. And then I have languages that I speak less well, and then I have the languages that I'm quite weak in. I just want to say that. I'm not fluent in 20 languages. I can't possibly maintain a fluent level in all 20 languages. But every language I learned for me was lovely, was interesting, was fun, was a chance to discover another culture. But the mindset, in terms of the mindset, I think an important mindset is, I know I'm going to learn the language. I don't care if I forget. I don't care if I'm in a conversation and even the most basic word that I know this word is basic, it's a simple word. I can't come up with the word in my conversation. Doesn't bother me. Things that I don't understand, or maybe I understood before, but I've listened to the same thing 10 times and I don't understand it, doesn't bother me. The brain will eventually learn the language if we give it enough stimulus. But the brain learns slowly, and the brain learns on its own schedule. And it's not because you study something. You study a list of words, or you study some grammar explanations, and that then you know it. It's just not how it works. Through a lot of listening and reading, gradually, according to some order that the brain decides, the brain will start to learn this, and then it will learn that, and you have not got that much influence over what the brain learns. Forgetting is a big part of learning, and there's even research to show that if we forget forget and relearn and forget and relearn. That's how we really get a good grasp on those things. The mindset is enjoy the process, don't get frustrated, and it's a long road. And therefore, try to listen to and read things that are meaningful to you, that are interesting to you. Don't spend too much time with boring textbooks. Find stuff that grabs your feelings that you find interesting, and you're going to learn better. Because it's more interesting, you will continue. So that's the mindset. Accept uncertainty, try to find a way to enjoy the process, and just keep going.
Enjoy the process and then just keep moving forward. All right, here is my last question. We talked about it a bit before, but what are the thoughts on the balance of input and output in learning a language? Just your thoughts. Like some people say 7 to 3, 3 to 7 or whatever, and what do you think about that?
Well, it depends on your situation. By and large, overwhelmingly input, because input is easy to organize. It's so inexpensive. I don't have to hire a tutor, and especially today. Typically what I like to do when I'm starting in a new language, we have these mini stories at Link where there's a lot of repetition. So that's 3 months. I want to go for interesting stuff. And you can find podcasts. Now you can get them transcribed if you haven't got a transcript. Ebooks and audiobooks. So there's just a wealth of material. And then you can watch Netflix or YouTube. So there's so much stuff. When I lived in Japan, like from day one, I tried to use Japanese wherever I could. I didn't have much that I could say at first. But on the other hand, every time I was in my car, I was listening. When I was at home, I was reading. So I spent far more time listening and reading. But if I went to the store, I would try to use Japanese. It's fun. Maybe I get it wrong, but even in business, even if my Japanese wasn't so good, I would try to use my Japanese. If I'm here in Vancouver, I spend most of my time listening and reading. I think people underestimate. You can't just listen to boring stuff. You have to find interesting things, something of interest. So I would be 80% input. At least 80%. For a Japanese person that's in Japan and has limited opportunity, overwhelmingly input. Comprehension requires a large vocabulary. And if you have a high degree of comprehension, now you can have really meaningful conversations with people. Because if you don't have a high degree of comprehension, you can't talk to people. Comprehension has to be the goal. Comprehension is extremely important. So input, definitely 80-90% input. Now, I will caution you, though, that eventually you have to speak a lot. If you want to speak well, you have to speak a lot. But in order to speak a lot, you want to have meaningful conversations. You don't want to just talk about the weather and what's my name. You want to have meaningful conversations on subjects of interest.
I think from your story, when you said input, I felt like input doesn't have to be a pain. I mean, some people are like, oh, I have to study English. Oh, I have to do this and do that. So they kind of push them to do it, but from your story it can be fun, like for example listen to podcasts that you're interested in or watching movies and stuff. So it can be input and it's rigid, isn't it?
Absolutely. You have to get to things that you found, not something that they pushed at you in the textbook. You have to find a way to make it enjoyable.
The last question. 最後にちょっと面白いおまけの質問を日本語でしていいですか？スティーブさんは日本に住まわれたことがあるということで、今でもちょっと日本の文化で苦手だなって思うことありますか？例えば食べ物でもいいし。
Okay. どこに住んでもね、どの国に住んでもですね、できるだけいいところしか、集中しないんですよね。この問題がね、それはカナダの方がいいとか、それいつも言えるんですよね。日本はね、もう人が多い。一番の問題は人が多いんですよ。日本の文化でいろんな細かいところに非常に美しい価値のあるものもあるからだ。それに集中して考えないといけない。
私のビデオを見てくださってる方で、例えばワーキングホリデーとか留学をされてて、ちょっとホームシックになられてる方とか、日本に帰りたいなと思っている方がいて、やっぱりそういう方たちにアドバイスできるとしたら、もちろんちょっとびっくりしてしまうこともあるけど、いいところも見るっていうところですね。
北米の人が日本行ってもですね、最初の間はね、全てはいいと、夢みたいなところですよね。だから非常に違うんだということで、それで半年経ったらね、ですね、ちょっとがっかりしますと。違った国に住んでて、それはノーマルなんですよ。それはもう生活ですよ。毎日の生活。もう慣れてくる。もしどうしてもこの国は嫌だと、それじゃあ自分の国に帰った方がいいですよ。日本のシステムを変えるわけにはいきませんから。だから好きじゃないならもう自分の国へ帰ったらいいんですよ。 言葉の勉強においてもそうですよ。この言葉は好きじゃないということであれば、それじゃあやめた方がいいですね。
なるほど。ありがとうございました。I was not prepared for how to end that video, so it ended a bit awkward. Sorry, it's completely my fault. Anyway, it was such an amazing interview, wasn't it? I have learned so many things from him, and I'm pretty sure you guys did as well. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you've got any questions or comments, leave it down below. Steve-san is a successful YouTuber. I put the link down below. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, you're more than welcome to as well. Thank you for watching this video, guys. Thank you, Steve.